Mr. Hermosa, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to do this.
Yeah. So let's just jump straight into this. Um, you are a relative unknown. You know, people don't necessarily know who Charlie Hermosa is. So, what is it about your campaign for governor that's going to make you stand out in a way where people are going to recognize your name?
Yeah, and I think that's always a it's always a good question, and I've been asked this because for all those who have heard that I am thinking about running for governor and I do want to run for governor, that was the one question they asked, like, what is it going to be different about you? And one of the things that I tell them is that if you look at what's going on with Guam today, if you look at, and one of the reasons why I want to run is because when we when we see education just falling apart, when you see no infrastructure, when you see crime going up, when you see the drug epidemic, when you see no economic development, we're still having a conversation about poverty. We're still discussing about over 600 kids with no families. I think it was time for me to actually break away from my corporate, lucrative position as they call it, and really play into what what the island really needs today for sort of an impact change.
What is that breakaway? What's that impact change that you want to make?
One of the things that I want to be able to concentrate is it's a leadership perspective that I want to take on. So, what does a leadership role really entail? That entails having a vision. That entails being able to make some tough decisions. That entails having accountability for everything that's going to happen throughout the island. And that's one of the things that we're missing right now is accountability for everything that's going on. We're waiting. We don't have a vision. We're trying to make it through one day at a time, 1 year at a time. And that's not the focus that we should have. We should have a development plan that takes into account the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan of how our island's going to look. And it's going to start with education. It's going to start with infrastructure. It's going to start with economic development. It's going to take a lot, but we don't have that vision. And I think that the leadership that I bring into the position is going to take into account that. Uh,
What are your thoughts on the current administration's uh, activities, programs, projects involving those things that you just talked about: education, infrastructure, economic development?
yeah, I mean, let's talk about that because if we start breaking each one of them down, a lot of it has been proposals, but there's no action. So, what do we do to make some of those things that have been proposed into actionable items? And that is where my experience comes into play. My background in the private sector on making or doing a lot with little. And right now, we're looking at a budget of $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion. What do we have to show for 1.3? Now, I wouldn't be saying this if what we saw in the street matched up to 1.3. But do you see buses running? Do you see that infrastructure touching the South? Do you see the education system working well where all the schools are opening on time? Do you see economic development? Do you see poverty going down? So if we're not really touching on these things, it's time to get somebody in there that can actually make these things happen.
Well, so you're a businessman, and arguably the governor is a businesswoman, and the lieutenant governor also had a long stint in the private sector, and you're running for a position that the lieutenant governor wants as well. And so, if you guys are cut from the same cloth, so to speak, from the business world, what's going to make you different from the governor, the current governor, and lieutenant governor? How are you going to convince our people that you're different from them?
Right. I mean, one of the things that differentiates us is the fact that I'm not a politician. So I haven't had any experience in those type of politics. And if that's the experience that I lack, I don't want it. I don't want the politics that are going on. So the fresh outlook of what we need to be able to be going through right now is the experience that I want to bring to the table. What does that look like? So I'm an educator. So I grind it out with all the teachers and understanding exactly what our students are exposed to. What is their next step in life after they graduate from high school, from college? I'm in there. I ask them, I'm with them. When it comes to business development, I own a small business. I struggle every month to make sure that we're getting payroll, make sure that we're paying rent. The economic development is another huge portion that takes into account. It's a big cycle: education, economic development, and infrastructure. I come from the transportation industry. I analyze this. I look at it and I see that we don't have one. And it divides our island into so many different ways that our people down south are not able to come up to get a good paying job in Tumon, in Agana, because they don't have transportation. So, those are the things that I want to be able to concentrate on and make sure that we're looking at it.
Aside from the lack of mass transit, what are the other issues that you understand people living under the poverty line in the island are going through?
I mean, right now, if we look at families that are underneath the poverty line, you look at their healthcare, right? You look at the foods that they're able to afford because they don't have enough to buy for. So they buy the essential that they can afford with what they have. That's number one. Running water, infrastructure, being able to have a home where they can actually live safely. And the other aspect of the poverty is being able to create a cycle where we can train them, we can teach them, make them get good paying jobs, or put them back into the workforce, allow them to have an opportunity to prosper just like everybody else. But right now, I don't see that. I don't see those opportunities for our people that are cut off, that are living below the poverty line. They don't have those opportunities.
Analysts could argue, or just any spectator of our political system can argue that voter turnout has just been trending downward, perhaps because voters feel a bit gaslit by the politicians. What are your thoughts on that?
I see it. I think this last midterm election, I've been really helping out with, with different campaigns. Obviously, I come from the village of Dededo, so I've been really at the heart of trying to see exactly why we have such low turnout. The consensus is that a lot of folks, just like you said, they hear it year after year after year, and nothing happens. They see the same folks running over and over. They see no change, so they're not compelled to actually make the make their position actually. They don't feel like they count. Like, what is it going to make a difference? And that's the wrong approach. We need everybody to come out and vote, because we can't just have a handful of people to elect our elected officials. Because if not, we're going to have the status quo, and we're seeing it happen right now.
So, part of the status quo that those who feel gaslit might be feeling is that corruption never goes away. What are your thoughts on corruption systemically and also corruption within the current administration, and how would you change that?
So corruption has been a huge topic of discussion.
Is it something that you're going to shy from? Because many of your Republican colleagues can't say the C word.
Absolutely not. I'm going to hit it straight on.
How?
And one of the things so I'm a very big process person. So when I look at things that are happening within, and I'm actually looking at some of the budgets that were submitted, pulling them off the website, and I'm trying to go line item, trying to look to see exactly where these monies are going. So when we start looking and dissecting each department, we're going to start seeing exactly what we look at and what we deem as wasted money. Why are we wasting money on this? And then you're going to start to see the trends of corruption. And what do I mean by that? Right? I mean, for those that are utilizing their position in the wrong way to be able to gain for their own purpose, or for their own interests.
So, what is your understanding of corruption in the current administration?
So, right now, as we see it, there's been a lot of discussions happening, especially about this ARPA funds, or about this PUA funds. And I will tell you that there has been a lot of investigations going on. And I will tell you from sources that I know that there are some things that are coming down the pipeline, which they should, because those monies do not belong to the people that took it. The monies belong to the people that actually needed it. So, from what I understand from sources that I know, there are some big items coming down the pipeline as far as corruption being exposed throughout the administration.
Are you talking about federal or local investigations?
Both.
Both. Okay. So, all right. Because the next thing I was going to ask you was, if you were talking about just federal investigations, I was going to ask, well, what about local investigations? And well, let's just ask it anyway. Do you think more should be done in the way of local investigations into corruption? And how? How would you facilitate that? Aside from just the attorney general.
No, aside from the AG, right? One of the things that we're promoting is transparency, and the other aspect is what office right now has been deemed responsible for the publication of these internal reports, the public audit office, and they get dinged because they're exposing a lot of what's going on internally. And the only thing that they're doing is actually just putting out there how the operations are occurring. So if things are happening in the wrong way, those things are getting exposed in the reports. There's nothing wrong. We need to make sure that we embrace those reports and we fix those things that are happening right now.
How would you protect and further promote the Office of Public Accountability's activities, anti-corruption activities?
Anti-corruption, I mean, we need to make sure that they have the right funding, number one, and we need to make sure that they have the right staffing, because it takes a long time to make these audit reports, produce these audit reports.
Let's get into a subject that's a little more shaky for Republicans, and that's the subject of police corruption. Your thoughts on police corruption in Guam and what you would do, if anything, to solve this problem?
Right. So I think there's two parts to that, because obviously it's also connected to the rise in crime that we have, because we don't have enough police officers in the street. And unfortunately, if the corruption is bleeding into the current staffing, then it's only going to take away from what's being done out there. So one of the things that we've actually talked about from a platform perspective is, if the current structure is not working, let's look at a different structure to be able to control. One of the things that we have been promoting is the fact that we want to get an elected sheriff, right? How do we bring in the different departments that are providing this type of law enforcement into one sort of umbrella, where we can have one elected sheriff that is elected by the people, and he or she will enforce what's going on internally and externally.
Can we just go back a couple of conversations to the source reports you're hearing of investigations into the current administration? Is there anything more detailed that you're able to say about that?
Well, I think probably as close as to saying that it does have to do with PUA, right? And the mismanagement of that. And the one thing that has come down, and I think it's evident, I think most people know what's going on with this investigation on the island. And the one thing that is clear is that the monies that were mismanaged belong to the people that actually needed it, and they did not get it. And that is one of the things that we need to ensure that we crack down across the board. Because every time the government takes one penny away from us, that's one penny less than we have to be able to spend on food, to be able to spend on our families, to be able to spend on our power. So what we look at the government, like, we should be utilizing the resources of the government. The government should not be utilizing their own resources to make a bigger government.
What sort of penalties, jail time, um, do you support for people who are convicted of crimes against the people? Crimes of corruption, fraud, money laundering, anything that takes away from the people's resources.
Right. I'm one to say that we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes in my life. I want to be able to look at a process that allows to take into account the fairness and being able to put a penalty towards that type of crime. So when you're looking at taking the money away from the people, I think that it should be a very big crime, because it's not a crime that's done with somebody unknowingly doing it. It was a crime that was actually almost like a heist, like it was actually a planned. It's never done by one person, and so those things need to be looked at heavily, because if you don't go after the root of the problem, systemically, you're always going to have that problem.
How are you going to convince through your campaign people living in poverty that you're going to be the governor for them and for their economic benefit?
I think from day one, from day one, what I want to be able to establish is that I want to be able to work with the village mayors and understand exactly how many families we have in those type of conditions, and start breaking down each one of those things that they need in order for them to live in a better position. But again, we're not going to be able to do it just by putting a process or just saying that we're going to do this. We actually physically have to start doing it. Unfortunately, what happened with the education system, with the schools not opening up on time, you saw how that was disastrous. But I will say that for the community coming together and being able to support and come together and rebuild some of these schools, paint, put back the plumbing that was needed, Some of these schools were open in days where it was going to take months for them to open. So why can't we do that for our own families? Why can't we come together as a community and help each other out?
You're talking about a nexus between public education and poverty. Can you explain that further?
Absolutely. I work with and I'm friends with a lot of teachers who have kids that come to school with no, with no gear, with, they know they haven't taken a shower. They know exactly where they live. They know they're malnourished. They know that. And so if you want to look at that, that is still happening. It's 2024 and we're still talking about that.
Lastly, Mr. Hermosa, your thoughts on taxes and the minimum wage.
Taxes, right? I mean, that's a big item with our government right now. They think that by raising taxes, they're going to be able to sustain and acquire more revenues, which is completely wrong. Because one thing, they're going to hit the small communities, the small business owners with higher taxes. And what it's going to do is it's going to take more money out of the people's pocket. So, for example, the vape tax, right? You know what's going to happen? They're going to those folks that are vaping, they're going to spend more. They're going to spend that extra 50 cents, an extra dollar, that extra dollar that you could have had in your pocket to get something to eat, to get a refreshment, to get something that would fuel your body. But now it's going to the government. So basically the government's taking your money away out of your pocket. So remember that every penny that the government takes out of your pocket is going to be a penny that you're not going to have to be able to sustain your life at home, with your own nourishment and so forth, with gas and so forth. So I don't believe that higher taxes is the equation. I think we need to lower the cost of the government, and we can do that. And by lowering the cost doesn't mean that we need to get rid of people, or that's not the cost. We want to be able to control the cost for the government, take those savings, retrain the people, and put them in positions where our outlook and our vision is going to be fulfilled with these jobs that we're going to have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. It's a cycle. We can't just look at it from a year perspective. The buildup is going to end within the next 2 to 3 years. Then what? Okay, so we need to start planning now. So more taxes, not the answer. Higher taxes is not the answer. Lower government costs is something that we need to continue to push. We cannot have a $1.3 billion budget if we can't show for it.
Private sector earners might feel, a bit nauseous about the differences between the pay disparities between that they have from them and those in the public sector. Your thoughts on raising the minimum wage.
So we need to look at that because that's one of the things that I have seen throughout a lot of organizations where the pay disparity, not only between government and local businesses, but when we compare what we're doing here, the jobs that we're doing here on Guam versus some of the mainland states, we're way off, and we need to be able to get them. But it's got to be a balanced act because we need to find a balance between the local companies being able to generate enough revenue to be able to cover the differences, but also sustain from a business perspective because we as a business owner, we're there also to prosper as well because we want to be able to take care of the business. We want to be able to hire more people and we want to be able to pay them well. So there's got to be a balance in that. But yes, we need to look at that.
Last question. What's going to make you a different candidate from any Republican who might be vying for the primary election gubernatorial seat, and also against Josh Tenorio or even Therese Terlahi or Chris Barnett?
I think that the primary way to look at me is, my journey. And if you look at my journey and what it's taken for me to get here, it takes into account that I was a Marine Corps officer. I was in combat. I led my Marines. I would never, one of the tasks that I had was to bring every single Marine back home, and I did. And I will say it very confidently that I would be willing to give my life for every single one of my Marines, and I would be willing to give my life for my people as well. If you look at it from a private perspective, I own a small business, but I did climb the ladder in the corporate side, and I was willing to give that up to be able to do what I want to do now with this cause, which is the right thing to serve the people. And then the last thing is, I'm not a politician. The fresh outlooks, the fresh ideas that I bring to the table are things that are going to get us not only to next year, but it's going to set us up for the next 5, 10, and 15 years. And that's the way we got to be looking at it. And finally, and lastly, the most important thing is I am a father. I want my daughter to be able to uh, grow up on Guam and be prosperous with her family one day, and for her to open up a business and to be able to help out the community. Or if not, I'm also an educator for everybody to be able to understand exactly what it takes to raise our next generation. It's not easy. We have a lot of teachers out there that struggle. Ran into a teacher yesterday that didn't have class because they didn't have any running water. These are the things that should not be happening. Not at this point. We need to ensure that we need take Guam to the next level, and the time is now.
Mr. Hermosa, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you.